And let me just start
Upstairs and do
recording.
it. Hey, bud.
Okay, so, and let me play here. All right. Sorry, everyone, just getting my area figured out here. Okay, so welcome everyone to the September meeting of the UXPA. My name is Kyle Susi. I'm one of the board members with my husband Roger, who is also a board member. And we're really happy that you could all come tonight to see Amanda talk tonight about fitting UX research into Agile development. And before we get into the talk, I just have some brief announcements. First, for anybody who has never been to a meeting before, welcome. We're happy to have you. And just so you're aware, we are the New Hampshire chapter of the User Experience Professionals Association. And all of our meetings are always free. We meet once a month. And no membership to the international chapter of the UXPA is required. So please feel free to join our mailing list if you want to know more about what's happening with us, be aware of our announcements and our meetings. On our website, nhuxpa.org, you'll see a list to join the listserv, and it's just 2 emails a month that we typically send, and an announcement and a reminder. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and we are on Slack. I highly encourage you guys to either join Slack or the listserv, or Facebook, just to talk to each other. And we encourage you guys to, share interesting articles, anything that's going on. We hope that's an area that becomes more active. So you'll see links to all of that on our website. And there are 2 other board members I want to introduce you to. So Jill, can you just say a quick hi to everyone?
Hey everyone, great to be part of this virtual conversation tonight. Excited to hear what Amanda has to say.
Great. And Christine Ferraro, I don't know, are you on here, Christine? She might be joining a little late tonight. Okay, well, Christine is here as well, and I just want to make sure you know that you can reach out to any of us at any point if you're interested in giving us suggestions about topics that you want to have, if you yourself want to speak, or if you have certain speakers you want us to reach out to. We're all ears for your suggestions. We want to make the group as great as possible and fill it with the content that you like. So feel free to reach out. And then our upcoming virtual meetings that are happening. So mark your calendars. We're really excited about these upcoming meetings. We have October 27th, the head of design of Vanguard CX Labs, Gavin Cooper, who's going to be giving a talk on organizational UX maturity. David Dylan Thomas, who literally just wrote, and I just got my book right here, on Design for Cognitive Bias, which I haven't read yet, but I'm excited to read. If I get a minute, I don't even know if that's possible anymore, but I do plan on reading it. So he's going to be giving a talk for us on November 11th. And Abby Jones, the UX manager of Google Health, she is going to be talking to us about throwing away your 5-year plan, which is pretty cool. It's not what you would consider a UX talk. It's more just about career development in general. Of course, she's a UX manager, so she'll have that perspective, but it should be pretty interesting. So stay tuned for more details on that. And you're going to talk about the other upcoming events?
Yeah, so other UX events coming up. We've got UX Writer Conference, and these are all virtual, by the way, happening the first week in October. There is Women in Technology 2020, Belonging in Tech. That's October 18th. And Market Street Talent. Oh, 8th, sorry. And Market Street Talent is also sponsoring this event too. So I'm sure Jay will probably speak to that in a little bit. We've got the Boston UXPA conference happening on October 23rd. It's an amazing conference, and it's right in our backyard, so it's great. I'm anxious to see what it's like this year being virtual. We've got Humanity-Centered, and Kyle, you actually are signed up to do this, and that starts on November 22nd. So do you want to tell everybody a little bit about that?
Yeah, Humanity-Centered is really interesting. It's a cohort. So I signed up for the first cohort, which actually starts on Sunday. It's 6 weeks that you meet and I don't know how big. I think the first cohort is 100 or 150 people that get divided up. And this is all about focusing on us, the UX practitioner, and making us more human-centered, talking about ethics, diversity, inclusion, how to have tough conversations with your team about white privilege, everything. Like, it's really about making ourselves more empathetic and more awareness around all sorts of issues. So it should be really deep and interesting. And their next cohort, as Roger mentioned, is November 22nd. So definitely worth checking out.
Great. Interaction 21 by the UXPA starts the beginning of the year, end of January through the first week in February. Again, that is virtual. And we have the IA conference is happening. What's the date on that one?
Next spring.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, we don't have an actual date for sure, but call for proposals is open now. So if you want to speak at that and maybe break the ice, that's a good one to start with.
He's got a good quote in the paper on this one.
We have some job opportunities here as well. So coming up here in New Hampshire, Appcast is remote or Lebanon, New Hampshire. They're looking for lead product and UX designer. Anthem in Manchester is looking for a UX design associate. Bob's Discount Furniture, looking for a director of UX and user interface. DECA over in Manchester, UI, UX, and visual design. Nice spillover there from the visual to the implementation side. Skillsoft in Nashua is looking for a UX designer. SAP over in Nashua is looking for an intern UX designer. So anybody who's getting their toes into the industry, good opportunity there. And Jordan's Furniture over in Concord is looking for a senior UX UI designer. And VMware is doing a remote position, 100% remote, and they're looking for a head of user research. So a good, diverse set of offerings here, from research to design to director positions.
Interesting to see the furniture shops all looking for UX people.
Well, you know, I bet all those student desks for home
Yeah,
schooling
I know, we bought 'em.
are probably
Yeah.
going fast now.
Yeah.
Special thanks to our sponsor, Market Street Talent.
Yay.
Jay Robichaud is on with us tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and let Jay speak a little bit about Market Street Talent. And we also want to thank them for sponsoring the Zoom meeting this evening as well, which allowed us to have, what, like 185 registered attendees for tonight's meeting.
It's pretty cool.
Yep.
Can you flick it over to the splash page for the WIT event?
I can.
Because this is super important for both men and women. We focus our WIT event. This is a women in technology event for our 2020. So every single year we do one, and sometimes we do two WIT events. And this is our big event for the year that we started as a company. So it started with a blog post from a colleague of mine talking about diversity in the workforce and how women are needed and sometimes not necessarily the forefront of hiring, both salary-wise as well as representation within the workforce. So he wrote this blog about how we as a community need to be champions for women in technology instead of, and a lot of times what people are seeing is there'll be a woman in technology manager and then they just kind of let other women come up, but not be champions for them. So really being champions for people who sometimes don't necessarily want to have that big, loud, outspoken voice, but be a champion for them. So that blog post in general made it around several key players, including who are sponsoring it now, which is the Women Coalition, and as well as High Tech Council. So this is an event that everybody can go to. It's free. Typically we have it at 3S, so mark it on your calendar for about this time next year. We will offer this again to be an on-site meeting. Food is awesome. We do the tacos from the 3S, from the place at 3S that does those really good tacos, and food for everybody there is really nice. And then They have a really nice bar. Usually we find a really good speaker. So everybody, if you could remember that, October 8th, sign up. There's the site below. If you need it, you can always link in with me. You can send a message to me privately or through Kyle and let them know that you're interested in signing up for that WIT event. So if you don't know, Market Street Talent's a recruiting firm, full life cycle recruiting, permanent and consultant placements. So we are absolutely happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to the end of this year and a nice start to next year. Let's just restart. But it's good that this is a good platform that everybody's been able to see. And we've seen a good amount of people on this meetup group, as well as, it looks like it's kind of growing which is good. A lot of people register for these events, and it's really nice that people can get together and talk about what's going on. So thank you for giving us the opportunity, and I hope to see everybody at WIT.
Yeah, thank you so much for sponsoring and just always supporting us.
No problem.
All
right, so with that, before I turn it over to you, Kyle, we're going to hold off on Q&A till the end. It seems to be the best approach when we're doing these things virtual. That way we can manage the raising of your hand. And for those that have not found that, if you open up the participant panel, there should be on the bottom of your screen, there should be an option for participants, and you will see the list of all the people that are attending. At the bottom of that, there's some options there, one of which is to raise your hand. And when we do Q&A, you put your hand up and we'll call on you in order. And then during the presentation, if you just make sure that your microphones are muted, that'd be most appreciated. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Kyle, to introduce.
All right, so I'm very excited to have Amanda with us today. So if you don't know Amanda Stockwell, she has been in this industry a very long time, and she is an independent consultant. She specializes in research and strategy, and her company, Stockwell Strategy, you can look her up there if you're interested in getting extra help with your studies. And she also speaks a ton and writes a lot about a lot of interesting topics. If you haven't heard any of her LinkedIn courses, you should check them out. She has a ton of great LinkedIn courses as well. So she's a wonderful trainer if you need a trainer for your team. But we're excited to have her tonight. So Amanda, I will stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Cool. Well, hi, everybody. First of all, I just want to say thanks so much for having me, and for so many people for joining. I'm excited. I was saying earlier that I'm disappointed that I can't be there in person to hang out with you all. But I am originally from Maine. I live in North Carolina now. But so I was saying I actually just made the trek to Maine last week. So I'm very familiar with the with my friends in the north. So in the after times, I will come visit you all again. So again, yeah, thanks, Kyle, for the kind of warm introduction. And as she mentioned, I'm going to be talking about adjusting UX research for an Agile world, which is something that it's conversation that I've been having for a long time, that I think a lot of people have been having for a long time, but that does not have a lot of great answers all the time. There's a lot of people still struggling with it. So I'm really just going to share with you some of the things that I have seen work really well. As Kyle mentioned, I'm an independent consultant, which matters for you because it means I get to see the inner workings of a lot of different teams and how they implement Agile. And so I'm going to share with you kind of the things that I've seen work best. So before I dive too much into adjusting UX research for Agile, I figured that we should talk about Agile itself, right? And how awesome it is. It's like duct tape. It fixes everything. You can slap it on anywhere and it will make things better. Yeah, there's some really great things about it. One of the really wonderful things about Agile is that it really focuses on adapting and changing to feedback and pivoting rather than just sticking to a plan for the sake of a plan. So I don't know if you can kind of tell from the background of my screen, that's the Slack channel. And Slack was originally an internal tool for a video game company. Now they're huge, as you probably know, but they pivoted kind of at the last minute right before they were about to go out of business. They were like, well, we really like this tool we have, even though our company is doing horribly. Let's just see what happens if we launch this. And so that's one of the things, there's stories like that people tell about Agile all the time. They're like, pivoting is magical. You can change really quickly and you can kind of adapt to things as they change. And that's wonderful. And Agile really focuses on collaboration, which is also wonderful. It's really great to be able to work with, as a UX researcher, you can work with designers and developers and product people and all kinds of people. And there's a super focus on putting kind of the bulk of the conversations and decision-making within cross-functional teams. So it's kind of like mandated from the background of Agile, or at least theoretically in the principles, that you're supposed to work really closely with people from different groups. And that's really wonderful. But like all good things, Agile doesn't actually really fix everything. It's only right in the right context. And the thing is that Agile was developed by a bunch of developers, a bunch of engineers who were working on engineering problems that didn't really make sense and weren't working really so well. So they came up with a set of principles for themselves, but it's really developer centric. And so just like, anytime you're designing something for your user, they were designing something for themselves. And it doesn't really work all the way around all the time. There can be some real challenges with getting UX research integrated into sort of traditional Agile environments. And we'll talk some more about the different things. One thing I kind of want to remind you of is that Agile is a general framework that is designed to kind of guide people, but it is purposefully not prescriptive. So every Agile environment is a little different. But one thing that almost every place that I've seen Agile kind of focus on is that you're supposed to kind of measure your success in lines of code, right? Like there's a big push to focus on output, right? Like how much did you build? How far have we gotten? How fast can you get things out the door? Which is great for development. It's not so great for research. I can't measure how much I've learned about something in lines of code. And in particular, I say this all the time, especially to my startup colleagues and clients, is that sometimes the best thing I can learn in research is that you shouldn't build something at all. Like that's not a good idea. Nobody wants it. Nobody needs it. You shouldn't invest any time in it. So the sort of Agile practice of focusing on learning by your output in terms of code doesn't really work so hot for UX research. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And kind of one of the underlying things about Agile, right, is that there's no specific dedicated time, most of the time, to conducting UX research, right? It kind of gets rid of that traditional waterfall sense of you have a dedicated discovery phase at the beginning of a project and then maybe dedicated time throughout. But what I've seen with a lot of teams, and I'm guessing that some of you might have seen, because I've heard this from lots of people, is that when you don't have any dedicated time to do something, whether it's research or something else, often that means that you end up having no time at all. And so when there's no specific dedicated discovery time or no specific dedicated evaluation time, sometimes it just means that nobody prioritizes doing research at all. Obviously, that's not good for someone like me who's constantly kind of trying to push for that. So in every talk I give, I try to work in a picture of my dog because I love him. He's very cute. That's Bromer. And he has a little secret from the squirrel that he's talking about, which is that the core magic of Agile, theoretically, is that you get the opportunity to learn about what's happening and then adapt to it. But if you're not learning from people, then kind of the magic of Agile is gone. And so it's really important to make sure, and I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here in this group, but it's really important to make sure that you are constantly actually getting feedback in an Agile setting, because otherwise, what are you responding to? Probably just the whims of your business stakeholders or your product managers or something, right? So the whole magic of it really is sort of centered around collecting that feedback from your sort of exploratory and generative work, but not everybody really focuses on getting that done. And so there's kind of all this debate about, like, what should we do? How should we make sure that research gets involved, that kind of thing. And I want to kind of reiterate what I said before, which is that while it's important that every Agile team really kind of focuses on building in UX research, there's no one right way. So I'm just going to tell you that at the start of this talk, right? Like, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of tips about how I have seen it work really well. But I want you to take all of this with a great big grain of salt and think about your own context, your own teams, what you're thinking about doing. Because as I mentioned, I'm a consultant. I work in all kinds of industries, all kinds of niches. Right now, I'm working with about 4-person team, but I'm also working with a Fortune 100, right? So I've seen like a really wide range of stuff. And the truth is, we are all just special Agile snowflakes. We all have our own context. We all have our own sort of user base that we're focusing on. We all have our own, even within the same organization, right? Different Agile teams have different personalities, different products they're working on, different focuses. So I'm going to give you a whole bunch of tips that I've seen work. And what I want you to kind of think about throughout the course of this is, okay, great, but how can I actually make that work in my own organization? Or if you're a freelancer or a consultant like me, what are some different things you might be able to try with different kinds of organizations? Because the good and bad thing about Agile is that it's adaptive, but that means that there is no easy fix. You have to kind of understand the nuances with everything moving in. So with all of that said, there are some things that pretty consistently work well. So the first thing I want to talk about is team makeup. So I know that one of the things that people ask me about all the time, not really just in Agile, but more so in Agile is, well, what do we do with the people, right? Like, do we hire a full-time research person and have them bounce around between teams? Do we have like a center of excellence? Do we have an internal agency? What do we do? And so I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the things that I've seen work pretty well, and then walk you through some of the iterations that I know sometimes happen by necessity, and kind of give you some of the pros, cons of some of the situations, and things that you can advocate for within your team. So one of the things that I really, truly recommend is to have cross-functional for all teams. And so when I say cross-functional, if you'll notice across the bottom, it might be kind of small, but I have a UX researcher, a back-end dev, a front-end dev, a back-end dev, a UX designer, and a QA person. You'll notice I have a UX designer and a UX researcher as individual roles. I don't want to spend the whole rest of the 45 minutes debating about UX roles, because we totally could do that. There's a lot to say there. But excuse me. What I will say is that I think that when you have the opportunity to integrate both a design person and a research person on one team, you get the opportunity to have both of those people focus the most on what they're doing. And typically I've seen, here, I'll go back to the slide. Typically I've seen cross-functional teams be dedicated to either a single product or a product line or one kind of set of things. And so when you're able to, if you have the ability to embed both a designer and a researcher, at least one, into a cross-functional dedicated team, I've seen really great magic happen, because typically researcher and designer will get to know the product line really, really well. They'll get to know the user base really, really well, and they can build on their insights over time with that particular team. It also allows you to build really close connections with the other members of the team, which I'll talk some more about. But especially in an Agile setting, it's important all the time to collaborate, and it's important all the time for especially people in UX research positions to be connectors. We are often in a position of telling people that they are wrong, or they need to spend more money, or they need to stop doing something that they wanted to do, right? Like, we're often sort of the bearers of bad news. And so having good relationships with people is really important there. So if you have all the capacity, I really recommend that you have both a dedicated researcher and a designer. Now, I know that in previous times I've given this talk, almost every time, at least one person has raised their hand and been like, great, where is that? I would like to go work there. Because it doesn't happen that super often that you have that much, that you have the resources to be able to hire both of those people. So in which case, what I've seen work kind of second best to a fully dedicated researcher per Agile team is to have a dedicated research team, at least two, at least a pair, and still dedicated UX designers per cross-functional team, but have research, kind of pairs or groups serving multiple different Agile teams. You don't get to be quite as dedicated. You don't get to be, you have to split your time a little bit more, but you can still kind of build relationships and really get to deeply know the product lines and the user base for the different products and that kind of thing. So I think this is a great alternative, and there's some pros and cons. It can be really nice to work with other researchers, and actually something that I always point out is that even if you're the dedicated researcher on one specific team, I recommend that you always collaborate with, if you have them available, other researchers. Anytime that you can have more brains on something, I'm a fan of that. So I always like to tell people to try to cross-pollinate across their cross-functional team and across different researchers within their team if they have that option. So that can be really great. You still have to split your time a bit, but you get to have researchers working together, and there's something nice about, Sue is out on vacation this week, or Joe's daughter got sick or whatever. You can kind of tap in and out when you're working together with a team of researchers, which is also awesome. But at this point of the sort of conversation, often still a lot of people raise their hand and be like, yeah, cool, I would like to work there. We don't even have that. My team doesn't have nearly that many resources. So what I see sometimes work okay, but not great, is the UXicorn, if you will. And again, I don't want to rehash the whole debate of should a UX person design or research or do both, and should we have dedicated roles? Maybe I can come back and see you all in person. We can have that whole other discussion. But my point for this is that it can work if you've got some sort of dedicated UX person on a cross-functional team, whether they tend to be more of a researcher or more of a designer, if they're getting you kind of a wide range of activities. However, please be really careful of this scenario, which is if you are supposed to be researching the things that you've designed, it's just human nature. It's not always this blunt, but it's really hard to remain unbiased. It is incredibly difficult to design something, to build something, and then collect unbiased feedback when you're doing evaluation about how well it's working. So with that in mind, I recommend that you at least partner up with each other, right? So if there's only one dedicated UX person on an individual Scrum team, I say partner up, maybe work with your other UX colleagues, have somebody run some of the research for things that you're building, or vice versa. Make sure that you aren't in the position where you're having to kind of really research and design everything on your own if you can, because what sometimes ends up happening is this situation where there is one single UX person at a big company that is supporting multiple teams. I say please no, because that makes it really hard on this poor unicorn over here. And it's not that you probably couldn't do a good job, but it's that you'll get burnt out. It's really difficult to support multiple different teams on your own if you're the only researcher. So again, I know that not everybody has access to all of these resources, but I really recommend that if you're in this position where there's one kind of UXicorn who's doing some research for multiple different teams, to really try to advocate for getting some additional resources so that there can at least be more than one researcher serving all the multiple teams. You'll appreciate it if you're not the only one. I've been there and it's tough. Okay, I'm gonna move on to other than sort of team logistics. One of the things that often is a struggle for Agile teams trying to sort of implement and assimilate UX research is just kind of the like day-to-day logistics. I've noticed that at some like really large companies, they might have like a research operations group that can help with some of this kind of stuff. But I have not often seen that in a lot of small or even medium or kind of medium large size companies. So I have a bunch of tips for just like logistics that have worked and really kind of helped people integrate UX research more. So the first one sounds like so obvious. And it's the kind of thing that you hear about, like, you know, going to the gym or doing other kinds of things that you don't want, but it's actually putting it on the schedule, and not just your own personal schedule, like on your cross-functional team schedule. So the cadence of that we can talk about too. The cadence can be a little bit different depending on, you know, what kind of thing you're working on and what your goals are and that sort of thing. But for instance, one of the teams I used to work with, we were redesigning a kind of major part of the platform. There was a WYSIWYG editor that we were working on, this was like 10 years ago. So it was drag and drop was like a hard interaction to work on. And so we were really concerned with like evaluating prototypes as we were going and making sure that they worked well. And so we had 2-week sprints. We did a usability test every single 2-week sprint for like a year. It just was on the books. But more importantly, we not just had it on the books, we held it sacred, right? Just like you can't skip sprint planning, you can't skip, you can't skip QAing, you can't skip release planning, you can't skip any of the other associated things, especially if you use a framework like Scrum. There's a lot of meetings that are kind of part of the just the fabric of the being of your Agile team. So I recommend doing that with research too. And the reason is that it gives you time to plan ahead. If you know you've got, every other Thursday you're going to have research, you can start recruiting people ahead of time. You can start making plans ahead of time. You can be flexible about, okay, well, are we going to have a prototype ready by this week to test? If not, okay, we'll have a backup plan. Maybe we can do some benchmarking, or maybe there are some interviews we want to be doing. It really allows you to kind of plan ahead. And it also just kind of makes it part of the being of the team, right? Like nobody ever has to wonder like, oh, when are the sessions going to be? Oh, when have you kind of set that up? Everybody just knows it's every other Thursday or every third Monday or whatever cadence is that works for you. Make it a part of the team's calendar and hold it sacred. Don't schedule your dentist appointments those days. Don't schedule team meetings those days. Like make sure that they are really kind of focused. However, I do want to talk about the cadence, because one of the other things that I hear a lot from teams is that, especially if they get to the point where they're like, okay, great, we're doing usability testing every sprint. And I'm like, cool, when's the last time you talked to your users about what they need? And they're like, what? Oh, right. So what I always like to kind of remind people is that although it's important to, especially when we talk about like Agile and iteration and focus on output, it's important to assess things and do evaluative research as you go and do evaluation. It's also important to remember to take a step back and to continue to do ongoing discovery work, ongoing generative work, ongoing work to understand. I think that COVID is the perfect example of this. If anything, this is one thing that I like about COVID. Whenever somebody asks me why we need to do ongoing user research, I say, what do you think you were going to be doing in July if I'd asked you in February? And people say things like, oh, I was going on vacation, I was doing this, I was doing that. And I'm like, yeah, what'd you actually do in July? Probably not what you thought. I didn't anyway. And so people's contexts change all the time. People's needs change, technology changes, the world changes, travel patterns change, all kinds of stuff. And it can really impact how you interact with something that you're building. It can interact what people need. And so just because you have at one time spoken to users, or you have at one time done some generative work to sort of formulate ideas and understand your problem space, you need to make sure you keep doing that, not just focus on like small evaluation type work. And in an Agile team, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that big picture work. But it's actually kind of the most important for you in terms of making sure that you are, kind of pivoting and moving the product in a way that actually responds to user needs, because I can make the best app ever for something that nobody needs, and it's not going to do your company any good. But if you can understand, something about a shifting need and find an opportunity to kind of explore a new feature set or focus on something else, you'll do your whole team much better. So just remember that while I absolutely am a fan of schedule research, make it happen, kind of focus on the logistics of it, make sure that you have some sort of reasonable cadence for small iterative type stuff and bigger picture thinking and exploration. This is such, again, like a seemingly simple thing, but especially if you're able to plan things at a regular cadence, allow participants to schedule themselves and rebook themselves. I can't tell you how much time I have saved. This is a screenshot of an old tool. Unfortunately, it's kind of been phased out, that my friends at Viget had built, but there's Calendly, and I think Doodle lets you do some of this, and there's like 100 other things now, but where you can set up times where you are free, and then people can book slots for themselves and rebook. A lot of these tools are free. It also allows you to kind of put things on your team members' calendars ahead of time as potential slots. We'll talk more about that too, but yeah, self-scheduling is one of those things that at first I was like, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. It won't save me that much time. And then once I started doing it, I was like, wow, I am never not doing that again. It saves you a lot of time. And the other thing is, if you work at a company with already existing users, or some sort of organization where you already are in touch with people, I really strongly recommend making your own panel. It can be as simple as, this is obviously blurred out, but as simple as like this is a Google Doc of some names that we were able to gather from a client that I was working with. There's a lot of tools floating around now that I know I've heard people using. Sometimes you can use something like your CRM. Like at a previous company that I worked at, we had Salesforce, and so we customized Salesforce to be able to add some questions about whether people were interested in participating in feedback and some basic kind of like screening questions. It doesn't have to be sophisticated, but especially if you're going to be planning research really regularly, it's helpful to have a list of people that you can reach out to on a regular basis. I know that there are also recruiting companies and tools. A lot of the recruiting companies I know are starting to allow you to do some of this management yourself as well. If people have specific questions about tools, I can dive into it. But regardless of what the tool is, I think you're always going to want to kind of balance talking consistently to your existing users and recruiting outside of that, getting some fresh insight. So I don't suggest that you use only your own panel, but I think it's really helpful, especially if you're recruiting people really regularly. It can be really a good way to save time. And also internally, if you're working in an organization that already has a big user base, it can be a way for your company to do reach out. So for instance, again, at one of my old companies, we ended up having the support reps ask every person who called in with a complaint of something that we were working on, if they would like to give the team working on it feedback. Sometimes we ended up with some kind of angry participants, but we got really great feedback from them, and it made them feel really heard. And when we, actually implemented the changes that they were suggesting, although they weren't, always directly responsible for them, it made them feel really good that we were listening and actually incorporating their feedback. So it was a way for us to kind of build relationships as well. Okay, next is where it comes to the research planning, which it's sort of tied with the logistics, but especially if you're doing really regular research, it can seem kind of overwhelming at first to kind of plan and have an ongoing constant plan for the amount of both data that you're going to kind of pull in and what to do with it afterwards. So again, here are some things that I've seen work really well at all kinds of different organizations I've worked with. The first one is write specific hypotheses to narrow down your scope. So a lot of times what ends up happening is when you're thinking about questions you could potentially ask, people have really broad, giant questions like, how do we improve the product? Whoa, well, that could go so many different ways. But the good news is that if you're doing research every 2 or 3 weeks or whatever your cadence is, you'll have the opportunity to ask things really, really often. So you don't have to ask really, really broad questions. You can narrow down your scope. And you can, you kind of start with an overall goal and then prioritize like what would be riskiest if we didn't know the answer to it, right? And typically the things that are riskiest are things about like who are our users or what are their needs or like how they're engaging something. Typically the riskiest things are not like what color should this button be or which of these micro interactions should we use. So if you're trying to kind of prioritize, and you don't always have to have this exact format, but I like to use this kind of general framework for me to phrase things. It's if we do build or provide this thing, then these people, those are typically your personas, will some desirable outcome, will do something they want them to. And we'll know that when some kind of actionable metric. So the do, build, or provide X thing is, especially if you're doing evaluation work, it's whatever it is you're working on. So if you provide a new feature, it's if this interaction works this way. It's whatever it is that you're kind of trying to answer a question about. The some desirable outcome might be desirable for you as the organization or for the user. It does not have to be both. And the actionable metric piece, this is kind of pulled from lean startup stuff, and so that is really focused on making sure that you have enough data to make decisions. You won't always have like a really specific actionable metric, right? Like if I'm trying to explore how people think about something, I'm not necessarily going to say, well, we will definitely build this feature if 92.5% of people evaluate it at 90% or higher. You don't always have that quantitative level of detail, but it helps you to have the conversation with your teammates about what sort of questions do we have? What sort of decisions are we going to make based on that information? And what are the criteria upon which we're going to make that decision? So having those conversations up front can help you really frame the scope of your research and help you kind of narrow down, and it helps actually running the session and the analysis later easier too, because even if you don't have a really specific actionable metric, if you can have a conversation about, well, we're doing this research because we have this question and this question will help us make these decisions, and here are kind of the endpoints that we will decide on, like if, and that criteria can be whatever you want it to be for your team. It will probably change from project to project, but it's mostly important that you have that conversation within the team so that everybody is kind of on the same page about like, why are you doing this work and what are you trying to do with the information after you have it. And the really great thing about this is that the more specific your hypothesis, the easier it will be to plan the research, because if it's really clear what question you're asking, it's usually easier to pick the method and easier to write the questions or make the test plan or whatever. It's also easier to come to conclusions. So again, if you've already had the conversation about what decisions are we trying to make and what data points are going to feed into that decision, then the sort of conclusion, the analysis and synthesis of the data afterwards will be much easier. Okay, and then this is another thing. Some people from more sort of like rigorous academic backgrounds kind of cringe when I say this, but I am a super fan of using Franken methods, right? So maybe you have some kind of exploratory questions about how somebody approaches something or the task, something that you would usually answer in, say, a set of interviews. But there's also like a couple of interactions that you want to get some feedback on. If you want to do a little interview and then push a usability test on the end, or do a card sort and then ask some survey questions at the end. Like there's nothing anyway in UX research that you have to be super strict about isolating methods, but especially in Agile when timelines are often pretty tight and you're kind of trying to turn around quickly, you might not have everything all at once to do the kind of like preferred method that you would. So kind of do the best you can with balancing the methods. But to that point, you want to balance kind of flexibility and rigor. So for instance, if you're doing unmoderated studies instead of moderated, maybe you conduct more sessions. If you're going to be doing, I know, for instance, like when a lot more of my work went online instead of doing any in-person stuff, we started doing more sessions and having more kind of backups for people, and doing kind of mixed method approaches to things. So again, there's no exact right answer to this to say, like if you're going to do an unmoderated usability test, then you always do twice as many people. There's no hard and fast rules, but I want you to kind of think about balancing ways that you can cut on scope or time, or ways that you can adapt the methods to fit the information that you have, but still focusing on being rigorous enough, and still focus on making sure that the quality of your the data that you collect is high. Because the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. If what you're collecting is garbage, or if you're not really getting the data you wanted to, you're not going to be able to make the decisions or inform the decisions that you were hoping to based on research. And when in doubt, recycle. So this sounds like cheating, and it kind of is, but it's actually really super useful for an organization. And what I mean by recycling is that do some benchmarking, right? So if you have, say, a research time slotted for 2 weeks from now and you don't have anything new and you're not sure what to do, rerun a past test that you've done. Whether it's, kind of you've set up standard benchmarking for overall how your product is doing, run the exact same set of questions but on a competitor, kind of compare how you're doing. Or possibly for instance, if you ran like a bout of research and you don't feel super confident about the results, or you got sort of mixed results, or it's been, several months since you've done it and you're not sure if something has changed. It is totally okay to do the exact same set of research, the same plan with a new set of people, or doing it, altering it a little bit to do unmoderated instead of moderated, or something like that. So if you're really just not sure, or if it feels like you've kind of scheduled yourself into a corner and you're like, oh no, I have research to run, but I don't know what to do, I find it really, really valuable to rerun past research, especially when I'm working within a product team or a sort of digital product or offering that where needs change really, really frequently, which, as I mentioned, in 2020, I think everything is changing really frequently. Information that you gathered 3, 6, 9 months ago might not still be valid. And so it is totally valid to rerun a set of research, or to look at a slightly different set of people, or, run it with maybe you've learned something about your personas and you've redefined them a little bit. So you're going to recruit a bit differently. It's all going to depend on your context, but there's a lot of ways that you can sort of reuse and recycle work that you've already done to get really valuable insight over time. And share the loads. Remember the first, 15 minutes of the topic, I was talking about teamwork and collaboration and cross-functional teams. My favorite part about conducting UX research in an Agile team is that it is not just my job. And it can take a little while to kind of build this up, but it is really great when you can get devs and designers and product people and whoever else is involved on the team to share the load. You're probably, as the researcher UX person, going to take the brunt of kind of the planning and maybe the moderating if it's moderated research, but getting the rest of your team involved is really great because they can see firsthand kind of the things that you're talking about. You can learn together at the same time, and naturally people who have a different perspective from you are going to pick up different things from research than you are. So, a good example is I was working on a platform kind of similar to Airflow for data scientists and engineers to manage the, I'm sure I'm even saying it wrong. I'm sure if one of my colleagues from that project was on it now, they'd be like, wait, you got it a little wrong. But it was a basically what we were usability testing was the monitoring site for these data scientists to see the flow of their data and make sure that everything was running smoothly. I knew enough about data science and the project to do my job, but I had colleagues who would observe who were actual data scientists or were the engineers working on it, and they would always pick up on different things when they were watching the sessions than I did, and that was great because there's no possible way that you can any single person can know all of that there is to know about something. So having different perspectives is really helpful. I have a tip for that, which is to offer compelling incentives. This is a little more difficult under COVID times, but at one office I used to work at, I was famously known as the banana bread girl. I would half bake banana bread, and I would finish baking it in the toaster oven in the observation room where we were running usability studies. And the whole floor would smell delicious and like freshly baked bread. And anybody was allowed to come in and have some if they came to the observation room and took notes for a little while. It was a very food-motivated group of people. Not everybody will be motivated by banana bread. I have been known to buy pizza, give out cookies. It doesn't always have to be food, but find ways to sort of compel your teammates to come. And the other kind of point that I was mentioning before about having other people's perspectives, because I often hear sort of the feedback that developers are like, oh no, I'm supposed to be writing code. It's going to be a waste of time for me to come do research. And I sort of phrase it like this. I say, listen, I need your help because you have knowledge about this that I don't have. And I need you to come to at least one of the sessions so that you make sure that, we make sure that we get your perspective involved in this early. And it's not appealing to them, to their sense of ego for vanity's sake. It's because it's true. You really need kind of the insight of the rest of your teammates. So, but if that doesn't work, banana bread did work pretty well for me. So try it out. Okay, finally, and then data analysis and integration. So as I mentioned, one of the really great things about having everyone in the sessions, and if you can have them take notes, this is a screenshot of what's called the rainbow method, but there's lots of different ways that you can do this. I recently on a project used a tool called Fun Retro, which is actually for retrospectives. We used it for note taking and it was great. But making sure that you include as many people as possible in the sessions, to be kind of observing things, and in the analysis, because again, you'll get everybody's different perspective, and people will start thinking about things as they're observing them. And I don't care how great your reports are. I don't care how snazzy your slide decks are. I don't care what great video clips you have. There is nothing quite so powerful as a team of people watching somebody grimace their way through interacting with an interface, or depending on what the context is, there's nothing quite like actually seeing people interact or kind of be involved in the session. So that also takes the onus off of you as the researcher for writing all the notes, which is great because then you can really focus if you're moderating on the sessions, and because it sort of spreads the load, shares the load. And again, just sort of a reminder that is, if you set really specific targeted hypotheses, the analysis afterwards is easier because you've already had the conversation about, here are the things we're looking for, here are the pieces of data or kind of content areas that we're interested in, and here are the decisions we want to make, and here are the criteria upon which we're going to make those decisions. Now, I would be remiss to not bring up that one of the best things about research is that sometimes you find something that you didn't even know you should look for, right? So just because something doesn't fit cleanly into the box of, well, this was part of the hypothesis, doesn't mean you shouldn't consider it. You absolutely should. It just means that it's a little bit faster to flag it as, oh, this kind of insight or this data point really kind of clearly marks to that hypothesis. This is really clearly outside of the scope of that. We need to look at this and examine that maybe a little bit differently than we would examine the things that do fit kind of closely to the hypothesis. So for instance, if you're doing a usability test of a prototype of a redesign of an app, you might have a really specific hypothesis and have a targeted goal on a specific workflow and making sure that it was easy enough for participants to use. But along the way, you might gather a bunch of feedback that actually your user's workflow has changed and they go about things in a different way than you thought they would in a different order. That's not something that's specifically tied to your first hypothesis of the interaction, but it's really important for you to kind of consider. So don't ignore things that aren't tied to your hypothesis, but when you can tie things back, do that, and you can kind of tag them. And like when you're taking the notes in this kind of format, you can sort of pre-tag things as to like, okay, we're looking for information about places people get interrupted or whatever it happens to be, whatever the target is and the decisions you want to make. And sometimes your decision path is really easy, right? Like sometimes you run some sort of bout of research, whether it's like exploratory and interviews or more like evaluative, you run some usability tests and you're like, we are awesome, we are doing great, we're gonna just keep going the way we're going. Everything's wonderful. Maybe not. Maybe you learn that users' needs have really changed. Whatever you've put together as an interaction doesn't work very well. It could be really clear that you should move forward as planned, or it could be really clear that you need to make a pivot. This is a part that's really hard for people to do, because this comes back to, as a researcher, then this means we're coming back to tell people that they don't have a good plan, or that something that they built didn't work well. This can be an uncomfortable position, but it's one of the most important things, and it's one of the pieces that ties the most back to sort of that agile setting, right? Of our whole goal is to be user-centric and to react to the changing needs of our user. So when we find something in the course of research that leads us to believe that we should change our course, we should really pay attention to that. And you can, I wouldn't recommend throwing a couch down the stairs, but if you need to, do something big to make sure that there's a pivot. Work closely with your product managers and product teams, and make sure that you have some sort of mechanism, whatever that looks like in your team, some sort of mechanism to raise the flag and say, hey, we need to do something different. It could be a small design decision. It could be a big overarching like strategy decision, but you need some sort of way to say, hey, we need to do something different. We need to change. And sometimes it's really great. The next path is really clear. You're like, yep, we need to change paths, but I know exactly what to do, right? Like it might be that, you were comparing two interactions and one of them was really clearly just much preferred. Great. But sometimes you get kind of mixed results, right? Like maybe nobody liked either interaction. Maybe people really liked elements of both interactions. Maybe, any number of things can happen, right? Like sometimes you leave a set of research and it's pretty clear what your next steps are. And sometimes not so much, but the good thing is that you have the ability on a cross-functional team to find solutions together and replan research. So if you're on that sort of cadence of, every sprint or whatever research, then you can start coming up with solutions for the very next round of research. And the other kind of piece of this is finding solutions together means that you're working with not just UX people, not just designers and researchers, but designers and researchers and developers and QA people and writers and whoever else is on the team to find solutions together. And this has a couple of benefits. One is, kind of the more obvious one, which is that, for instance, a developer is never going to suggest something in a kind of new idea that they can't technically build, right? That's not feasible. So you kind of learn really quickly what you can and can't do. But more importantly, when everybody's involved with coming up with the solution, everybody feels attached to it. You don't have to do any, you don't even have to describe it, but you also don't have to sell it, right? You don't have to convince anybody because everybody's going to see a piece of their own idea. If, I made that box, and Bob made that box, and Kyle made that box, and everybody had a little say in what happens, then everybody feels good about the solution, and you have a really easy way to kind of quickly suss out the things that will and won't work. So what I love to do is after, in a kind of agile way, after I have, say, a round of usability tests, have a debrief with the whole team, everybody to kind of talk about what we found, and then another session to kind of talk through like anything that we need to brainstorm on or kind of figure out a new solution for right after the research is over. And then it's not some like separate thing. It's when everything is fresh in everyone's brain, and you can really clearly see the connection between here's what we found, here's what we're going to do about it. But all of that said, all of this, like, make sure everybody's involved, make sure that everybody gets to come along. Also recognize that there's not really ever going to be, at least that I've seen, a way that everybody can clear their schedule to be in every session all of the time and participate in everything. And I know that documentation in Agile is kind of not thought of very highly, I'll leave it at that. But there's some level of documentation. It can be super high level. These are pretty old now, but examples of really high level things where I found ways to keep everyone in the loop. So we had a spreadsheet of like what research we ran in what sprint, what key findings were, and then links to more detailed reports. And then I have these kind of summaries that I would write. And I use the 5-15 rule, which is they should take no more than 5 minutes to read and no more than 15 minutes for me to type up. So, you know, that takes a little practice, obviously, and it might look a little bit different. And I'm not super strict about it, but really all you want people to know is like, here's what happened, here's what we learned, here's what we need to do about it, and here's what we need to do next, right? And sometimes the do next is, well, we need to research more, I don't know. Sometimes the do next is really clear. The kind of finding simple ways to keep everybody in the loop and make sure that everybody has access to everything in a simple way. I'm not a particular proponent of any one tool. I don't think it matters as long as everybody's comfortable with it and using it. It could be, these are both Google. This is literally an email and a Google Doc. I've seen people use Jira, like there's all kinds of different tools, but as long as everybody is using them the same way, that's all I think really matters. And importantly, in Agile, add stuff to the backlog, right? The dev backlog, not just a different research backlog, but add stuff that you find, like if there's some takeaway where you're like, we really need to do X thing, we need to prioritize examining how this data is stored or whatever, make sure it gets added at least for consideration in the next, you know, like kind of release and sprint planning. Because if you collect all of this information and don't do anything with it and just write up nice reports and then send them off into the ether, they may not ever get acted upon. But Agile already has this kind of built-in system of reviewing roadmap and updating priorities and updating, you know, kind of more specific plans as you go. So take advantage of that and add things to the backlog. Even if you don't know exactly what the answer is or what the solution is, add things so that you can be sure that things don't get lost, because that's where everybody's already looking anyway. And really, just most importantly, the really best part to me about Agile is that there's this focus on always constantly looking to change, not getting stuck on doing things just because that's the way it's been done. And so take advantage of that, look for ways that you can keep learning, look for ways that you can keep getting feedback, and then make sure you're actually acting on that. So with that, thank you. I think I saw there were lots of questions. So let me see if I can pull up the...
Yeah, thank you so much, Amanda. That was awesome. And for anybody that has a question, just feel free to raise your hand in the participants panel. Let's see if we can see that here. Okay. It looks like Christine Fair, you have a question?
Hi, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Amanda. That was a great talk. I always love your presentations. So my question is just about when you were talking about thinking about the big picture. So I'm working at an organization where we definitely do have research built into our schedule, but all of that research is informed by our product roadmap and our Epic tracker. And so is there a way to kind of schedule in refocusing on that big picture or looking back to that, or how do you recommend doing that?
Yeah. So, and one thing I sort of glossed over this, but one thing that I should have maybe specified more is that I think it's really important for UX research to be really closely partnered with product management, who is typically in an Agile setting the ones who are in charge of the roadmap, because things that we're finding along the way should be influencing what we're planning with the product roadmap, right? Like that sounds obvious, but it is maybe not surprising, but it's like kind of too bad how many times I see like a product team being like, cool, we have all this stuff from the business, and the UX team being like, cool, we have all this stuff from the users, and they don't ever mix. So the way that I have kind of like a specific approach that I might recommend is making friends with the product owner and managers on your team. But, you know, kind of having, what I would do is I would have like joint research endeavors about once a quarter if you can, but less often is okay too, to say, all right, let's look at the next kind of chunk of stuff. And I would typically do this before we would have like big planning endeavors. So it depends again on kind of how your specific Agile team is structured. But before you have like really big planning meetings, I would say, let's do a joint research effort. Just do a little, you know, do some interviewing to make sure that our user needs haven't changed, or some sort of, you know, like generative research, depending on what the context was, to make sure that the things that are in the list of priority are still the priority that they ought to be, and still the way that we're thinking about them. Because every place I've ever seen has done that at least 3 months in advance. And so the way that I kind of phrase it is, or the way I presented it is, let's do this research together so that I can help you decide the priority of all this stuff, so that we can inform the, you know, sort of schedule within which we tackle this stuff. And if they don't want to do it with me, then I do it anyway. As a general rule, I'm a big believer of if you present people with data, they're almost never upset about it, even if they didn't want it in the first place. So sometimes I just go do it anyway. I've run into that a couple of times, but you know, if you can kind of build that relationship over time, I've really had people kind of come to rely on it of, okay, we've got this release planning coming up. We need to make sure that you know, I have data to inform the priorities. We set them 6 months ago and we're not sure anymore, you know, if that's exactly right. And some things, of course, you can't change, like, you know, just functionally, you might need to implement some things, you know, in a certain order or whatever. But I really kind of phrase it that way, as like, let's, yeah, like, let me help you prioritize. Let's do this together. And try to set it at, I try to basically match whatever cadence already exists within the team, so that I'm not introducing some new thing for people to keep track of. So if there's already some existing cadence for release planning, or you know, whatever that looks like at your organization. And if there is no real cadence, then I would just pick a time, like twice a year or 4 times a year or something, just to kind of try to set that up, to get people used to the option of, do you need help prioritizing stuff? Here, I can help you with that. That answer your question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Sure.
Next we have, is it Kayla or Kala? I'm not sure. I think it's Kayla Campbell.
It is Kayla, actually. Thank you. I actually work in a B2B situation where we have kind of a low-code, no-code platform. And so our customer, or our user, is actually the client as well. And what I find, and I'm surprised to discover this, but what I find often is that our business partners will make decisions about what's good for the users. and will make requests of features and things that, benefits that they want to see implemented in the solution. And so then we come on board as consultants and we come in to help them, improve or upgrade or do something with their system. And along the way, we discover that there's a whole bunch of things that they've implemented that either don't really make sense, aren't really sort of optimized, could be done so much more efficiently, really make us question whether or not the user actually likes that. And so we, of course, start asking, can we talk to your users? And we find that the client then is kind of like, well, we don't really need to bother the users, or it's peak time, or, they're not available, or whatever. And, in the case of a current project I'm working on now, their workforce is about 12,000 people. And if you sort of extrapolate out an 8-hour day, you're looking at about 1 million hours of work over the course of 2 weeks versus I'm asking for 10 hours of time. So 1 million hours or 10 hours, it doesn't seem like such a big request. And yet there's a lot of resistance to allowing us to talk to users. And I think it's because they're afraid that we might talk to users and deconstruct what they've lobbied so hard to have built. So I'm wondering, how do you mitigate that sort of situation? Have you encountered that? What is your experience with that?
Yeah, so yes, first of all, I have, and I'm sorry, because it's a crappy position to be in.
Shocking.
I know. And I think that the thing about UX research, and I was kind of alluding to this before, is that we are often in not great positions, right? We are often in a position to tell people they're wrong, tell people not to spend money, tell people to spend more money, tell people that their design stinks, tell people that they shouldn't have even built the thing at all. So the way that I kind of mitigate that is not specific to Agile or really anything, but it's really on that relationship building and kind of focusing on, here's how I can help you. Here's how we can all do better together. Here's the information I'm hoping to gather. And here's, and sometimes that means that I alter the method that I would really like to do. Sometimes that means that I don't go as all in on, say, for instance, I want to do, let's say that I think that we're moving in the wrong direction, and I would really love for us to do some, like experience sampling or some interviews or something to learn about users' real context. Well, sometimes that doesn't fly as much as, hey, we have these new designs and I would love to usability test them and just make sure that we're doing a great job and are, implementing it the way that you intended us to. Wink, wink. And then I do the usability test, but I actually spend like 50% of the time doing an interview at the beginning. And yeah, kind of sneak it in.
Sneaky.
Sneaky. So I find ways, but the goal is still the same of like, let me find ways to help you and to, whatever it is, whether you need to help make a decision, you need to help prioritize something. We want to make sure we're doing something in the way that makes sense to users, or you have really great ideas about, the functions, but we want to make sure that the interactions are working well or whatever, which is not a lie. It's just a bit of an omission because it's not your only goal. That's
a great idea to sort of think of it as a real-time user interview. Just sneak it into the test. That's a great idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on the context, but basically I'm all for being sneaky. This is the
yeah. High five. That was worth it just for that. That was great.
Okay, cool. So if you take nothing else away, be sneaky.
I just got permission. That's so great.
I will grant you to any sort of sneaky position you need.
All right. Let's see. We have Erica. Erica Varga has a question.
Yeah, this is Erica. So I work for a company that does usability tests pretty regularly, except that they take a really long time. They take anywhere from several weeks to up to like a month just to recruit people, run the usability tests or conduct interviews. assess the results afterwards, look for insights, write reports, get out, early feedback to the teams. And it just takes so long. And when I saw your slide where you had conducted usability testing every 2 weeks using the sprint model, I was wondering like, oh, wow, how did you do that? How, what can I take away from that we could use to try to, get our testing into shorter time periods? So I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that. Like, how do you fit testing into 2-week sprints? Did you conduct, who did you conduct them with? Were they internal people? Were they with customers? And how do you really squeeze them into the sprints?
Yeah, sure. So one of the first things is that by putting it on the calendar, it kind of adds that pressure, right? That like fire to be like, oh God, we got to do this in 2 weeks. And it kind of forces you to figure out where you can make cuts. And that's going to be different for every team, every context. But in that particular case I was talking about, we had built a fairly large database of existing users that we could reach out to regularly. It was an email marketing platform for small businesses. We had a pretty wide range of people that we could recruit or reach out to. We had them at the same time every single week. So we were actively, once the first 2 or 3 sprints were the hardest, but once we got going and we just knew we were going to be doing it every 2 weeks, we started recruiting people and scheduling them for a month or 2 out, even when we had no idea what we were going to be talking about or doing usability testing on. Because a lot of that, the logistics stuff, can take a long time. Now, we were lucky that we had already built up a panel of people that we could reach out to. It's not as easy if you, for instance, have medical devices that you need really specific users for. But it also forced us to adjust sort of our thoughts and expectations around, we weren't writing really detailed reports or making fancy slide decks anymore. We were having debrief sessions and group ideation or sketch sessions, and then we were writing kind of texts with kind of simple video clips that took us no more than a day to sort of compile. So it was sort of not death by, but sort of winning by a million cuts, right? So there wasn't any one thing that I was definitely do this. It was sort of lots of little things along the way that we could cut that would help us kind of turn that around quickly. That also, in that particular case, it really helps if you have dedicated research people, because I think that would be incredibly difficult to do if you were, for instance, a single research person who was supporting 3 teams. That would not work. You can't do that. So you have to kind of be realistic about it too. But I think, so to kind of recap, it was lots of little things, but it was having easy access to people, proactively scheduling them. It was kind of cutting scope on some of the way that we did reporting and stuff. I've been using this cool tool called Tetra that you upload videos of sessions and it automatically transcribes them, and then you can search and make video clips super quickly. I've been using that. If you have that or something similar, I highly recommend, because everybody loves video clips, but they're traditionally a lengthy process. So I really like that because I probably remember enough of the quote to be able to search for it in the transcript and be able to kind of pull things quickly. So I've done that. And also that because you're proactively planning things, you can start kind of having drafts of test plans or research plans ahead of time, right? So if you're going to run a usability test in 4 weeks, even if you don't know exactly what it's going to be, if you have a slow Tuesday or something, you can get a little bit ahead of planning for it. So yeah, there's no one thing, but it's looking for lots of different ways you can compress. And one of the other things to mention there is that we would often work directly with our design and dev partners on that, so that we were in that kind of debrief and ideation session. It was about an hour or 2 of people's time, but then we would often leave without having to write a report. or we would write like that very minimal report just to sort of document what we had done. So yeah, no like magic bullet there, but lots of little ways. And also a lot of it is just sort of like putting that expectation, putting that timeline, and kind of being like, this is what we're doing. Here we go. And kind of forcing that to happen. But also recognizing, like I said, if you've got, say medical device users or something, you can't always be that fast. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really helps. It sounds like there's a lot of little things to do to make the process a lot faster, and just making cuts wherever you can. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the other just kind of note to that is also being really clear about what those cuts are to everybody else, so that everyone knows, like at the end of this, set of interviews, you're going to get a 2-page summary with some video clips. You're not going to get a 60-page deck. Kind of setting expectations appropriately too helps.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, we've got time for 2 more. We have 4 and Jack. So 4, you're up next, then Jack, and then please feel free to just jump on to the UXPA Slack channel if you want to keep the conversation going after the meeting. But we're aiming to wrap up by 8-ish. So go ahead, 4. You're on now.
Hi, folks. Thanks, everybody. Amanda's great. Nice to see everybody. Amanda, my thing is operationalizing UX with Agile. And a lot of it is about wedging them into the table and at a point where they make a difference. So one bad example was working with a group doing SAFE. And if you remember the SAFE poster, there's a tiny little place down here that says UX and like 79 different pieces of the puzzle. So I'm curious, you've talked a lot about operational stuff. I just wonder what your thoughts are about kind of the keys that you found to really having UX be an equal partner whose impact is seen to be equally important, especially because I see Agile as so delivery oriented as opposed to discovery. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, that is an ongoing challenge. So I'll just say that, right? Like, I don't have a magic anything, but I think what for me, and full disclosure, like it may be that I am biased because at this point I'm consulting. And so a lot of times when people come to me, it's because they know that they have some need for UX research, right? Like maybe they have 1 or 2 people and they need to like train their team or, kind of work on operations, or maybe they don't have anybody, but they recognize that they should. So full disclosure, I for the last like 8 years, that's been most of the interactions that I've had. But with that, with my previous experience and even with that, I think a large part of it comes down to, again, relationships, helping people understand that my job is to make your job easier, right? So like if I do a good job with research, you'll be better able to make design decisions. You'll be better able to make product decisions. You'll be better able to make, marketing decisions or decisions about support. And I know that there's sort of an ongoing discussion right now about like UX versus CX versus service design versus blah. To me, I don't really care what it's called, but if I'm learning about users, I want everybody to have that information. And so one of the things that I found really useful is to basically make friends with different parts of the organization, and to kind of say, for instance, like if I have got friends on the marketing team and they're like, man, we really wish we knew this about their users. I'm like, oh, well, I can find that out for you. It doesn't have to be a UX project officially. Now, again, I am a person who grants permissions to be sneaky and to do things without, I'm not big on asking for permission. I'm more on asking for forgiveness. But again, I'm kind of the mindset that like, if you provide people with data, they're very rarely upset about it. So that's one piece of thing is like helping people see how you can help them, right? Like I can make you look good. I can help make your decisions easier to make. I can help you, whatever, whether it's marketing or QA or whoever, like I can help you with your job and help you look good. And we can all be more successful if we have this information. And then the second piece of that is tying back to what have we done with UX research and what have we learned and how has that impacted us over time? And sometimes if you're lucky, it's really specific and you're like, we made this change and it saved us, X amount of support phone calls, so that saves us Y dollars. If you can make those sort of connections, do it, because other people in companies pretty much always understand money, right? Or like support call volume or site visitors or like whatever kind of tangible things you can tie to there. There's tons of research about if you've got a better experience, your project is likely, or your company is likely to be more successful. There's all kinds of stuff. But if you can find something tangible within your organization, even if it's a reach, even if it's not exactly tied, if you can make those connections and help people understand the business value, and to understand where they're where when you make customer or user decisions that also benefit the business, and you can help find more of those opportunities to, it's not just make more money, a lot of times it's saving money, which people kind of overlook. But anytime you can speak the language of I made you money or I saved you money, whatever that looks like, people respond really well to that. So some of it's sort of the bottom up, like making relationships and helping people understand how you can help them and being willing to do it, right? Like, frankly, I've occasionally done a lot of extra work that wasn't really part of my purview, but it's because I wanted someone in customer service to have an answer that they needed, and I was able to do it even if it wasn't part of my role. But then that person was a huge advocate for me, and we were able to make a lot of changes, and so it's not inauthentic. I did it because I really wanted them to have the data and because we frankly needed it, but it then, it kind of builds on top of each other. So yeah, so make relationships, and if you can, talk money. Those are my 2 tips.
Great words to live by. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Great. All right. Last question. Jack, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I guess my question is fairly similar to the last, but I find myself on a fairly new team that really hasn't adopted a very user-centric design methodology. There's a lot of kind of designing by opinion or subjectivity. So, and UX and user-centric design is very objective. And I was just wondering, I guess, how you may have navigated that kind of ethos in a company before, if there's any other strategies that you might have considered with that subjectivity versus objectivity.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the first thing is to say that, again, this is, like an old, I don't even know who to attribute it to. It's an old thing to say, like, you are not your user, and neither is, probably the other person on your team. And so the first thing to kind of remind people of is, like, you might prefer that. You might think that works better, but you are not the one that we are building this thing for. And I like to remind people of even just really simple ways where your own particular context might be different than your users. Even if they seem really similar, they probably have a really different context. They might have really different goals. They might have, like, an example that off the top of my head, when I was working at that email marketing company, we had a lot of small businesses who were like retail shops, who often the computer they were using to compose their emails was also the computer they were using to, like, take sales. And so they were getting interrupted all of the time because people were coming into their places of business and buying stuff. And so even though on the surface we were really similar in terms of, like, technical ability and we understood their goals, we weren't interrupted every 5 minutes when we were testing stuff out ourselves or when we were looking at designs of things. And so looking for ways to kind of highlight how the people that you're building for or on behalf of are not the people that are on your team. Almost certainly, in like 13 years of work, I've never had that actually be the case. I've had plenty of people think that was the case, but never actually. And then also, again, rather than sort of asking permission to get feedback, just going to get it. Like, just, even if you don't have budget for it, like, make it happen somehow. A good way that I've seen to do this, again, is like, if you have an existing product and existing channels of communication, like a customer support team, or like a help chat, or even a complaint channel, like, reach out to some of those people and see if they'd be willing to give you feedback. There's lots of different ways, but just getting feedback, and not to prove people wrong, but to kind of show them data of, look, like, here's what we thought, here's what people said, here's how those two things are different. Here are some specific tangible things that we can do that are different, that could improve things. And it's, it never feels good for people to have their opinion be voted wrong, but it's much easier to fight fights based on data than to fight fights based on your opinion versus my opinion. Like, everybody has a favorite shade of blue, but there's only one shade of blue that users will prefer, right? So everybody can say, I like cornflower blue, I like Carolina blue, I like whatever. But if you do some research and, like, survey customers and they like whatever one, no one can argue with that. So fighting those kind of subjective, like, I like this one best, with objective data when you can, also kind of depersonalizes it, so then it doesn't become so person versus person. It just becomes, well, here's what the data says. Take that. Take that for what it is. And it's not me versus you. It's not anybody's opinion. It just is what it is. Now, of course, there's lots of ways you can present that and lots of context that goes along with that. But I would say just, go ahead and get data. And also it similarly goes back to that relationship. I feel like a broken record, but building relationships and helping people understand, like, we don't have to have these 4-hour debates about which thing is better. If you just let me run, like, a couple of usability tests, I can just tell you, like, what we should probably do, or I can give you some feedback, or, so sort of phrasing it like, I'm here to make this easier for you. I'm here to give us all these 3 hours of meeting time back. I'm here to, we don't have to have a debate about this. We can focus ourselves on bigger problems. Let me take care of that. And so sort of phrasing it as, let me take this off your plate, rather than, I'm going to do this thing to add to our plate collectively.
Awesome.
Thank
Well, thank you so much, Amanda.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks all for joining.
So we will be posting the recording from tonight's meeting, and registration through Eventbrite. You'll get a follow-up email with that link. It will also be posted on the NHUXPA Facebook page and on the meeting page of our website. That's nhuxpa.org. And again, the Slack channel or workspace, we've got a channel for the meetings. And one thing that I was just talking to Kyle about during the question was that we typically open up during the introductions to the meeting as to whether or not anybody has any job openings that they're looking to fill, or if anybody is looking for a job. And so I apologize for not bringing that up at the beginning. But we do have the jobs channel on the NHUXPA Slack workspace. So please feel free to utilize that. And we've seen a little bit of activity on that recently. So with that, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. And again, thank you, Amanda, for a wonderful presentation. And that's it. Everybody have a great evening. Be well.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I will join the Slack so that if people have questions and didn't get to answer them tonight, I'm happy to, I'll log in there. So if you want to send me follow-up stuff or reach out to me otherwise, but I'll join that so that people can ask questions.
Oh, that's great.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks everybody for joining me. I hope you all stay safe and well and warm, all those things.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Amanda.
Bye.
Thanks, Kyle and Roger.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.